You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hello, my name is Annie, and I'm from the United States.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and together we are Fresh Hell, your favorite international podcast. Happy holidays, guys! Tomorrow is Christmas Eve over here, and you might remember that for us, Christmas Eve is the big deal.
Yes, and one day later, we're celebrating Christmas Day, and this year it's a very 2020 Christmas, isn't it? You, like us, maybe you're not able to celebrate with all of your family due to everything going on. You might need to stay home alone, not just to, keep yourself safe, but to make sure that you don't endanger your loved ones. But it's all going to be all right eventually.
Yes, it will all be alright. And because it might be painful for you guys to not be able to spend the holidays with your family, we are here to keep you company, at least for a little while. And today we will be talking about a case that has very similar premises. A person has to spend Christmas separated from his family, and what ensues is a violent fight for life and death. Who will be the last man standing?
Yeah, this is a tough one. This case takes place in 1990 in Chicago, actually about 16 miles north of downtown Chicago, in a small town called Winnetka. Today, as well as in 1990, there are about 12,000 people who live there, according to their census. Winnetka was founded in 1835 when a man named Erasmus Patterson and his family arrived from Vermont. Of course they did. Erasmus is such a New England name. And settled in the area to build a tavern for people who were traveling on the Green Bay Trail Post Road. That was a railway that used to travel between Chicago and Green Bay, Wisconsin. Nowadays, Winnetka is one of the wealthiest places in the United States. When you look at the average household income and the average home price, which is about $2 million, and it was named, quote, one of the best places to live in 2011 by CNN Money. And you can take a look. I mean, if you look up the town, you'll see it. It's a lot of house porn, very classy house porn, though. It's like, no. Not going to say that. Anyway, some of these houses were designed by famous architects like Walter Burley Griffin, John S. Bergen, and Robert McNitt. Also, Howard Van Dorenshaw and David Adler, among other prominent architects. And Winnetka is also the birthplace of Rock Hudson. All right, so to paint an even better picture of Winnetka, I would now like to quote from you a little bit from the Chicago Tribune article entitled, quote, Winnetka, a wealthy slice of suburbia, from August 30th, 2010. Quote, the Tony North Shore village of about 12,200 residents is what newer Cook County suburbs aspire to be. Winnetka's canopied streets and pedestrian-friendly downtown are the real deal, not lifted from a new urbanist's workbook. Its early 20th century home styles are what boxy new McMansions try to emulate. I love it. According to Business Week, the village is among the top 15 richest zip codes in the country. Winnetka is especially popular among traders, executives, and lawyers who leave the grit and bustle of the loop 16 miles behind when they commute home. Winnetka's downtown, actually 3 small districts anchored by Metra train stations, is a hub of rush-hour activity that doubles as a daytime destination for stay-at-home moms and retirees. Its beach glass and driftwood shops mimic those in New York's Hamptons, sans the celebrities. Open your wallet wide to buy a house in this village where grand homes dominate tree-lined streets. The average sale price this year has been $1.32 million. Recent sales range from a 1950s fixer-upper that sold for $290,000 to a 2002 4-bedroom house on the lake that went for $4.9 million. Winnetka's houses comprise a field guide to architecture from Dutch colonial to Foursquare Tudor. Quote, we get young families from the city because they're used to living in a pedestrian-friendly place and because of the trains, said Sherry Molitor, agent with Koenig & Stray Real Living in Winnetka. And we get transferees who want their kids to go to New Trier. End quote. Multifamily homes are scarce, scattered mostly along Green Bay Road. Quote, Rentals are very expensive and hard to find because some transferees want to rent until they've sold their old houses, said Molitor. The owner of the recently rehabbed Library Place found renters for its 5 units, even though they started at $3,500 a month. The most affordable are over-the-store apartments downtown. The village has a low crime rate, though a string of summer burglaries on the northwest side might have some residents sleeping less soundly. Typical is the recent police log that included a high-end stroller swiped from a yard, a bicycle lifted from a downtown bike rack, and a DUI. End quote. Remember this part. We'll come back to it later.
Winnetka sounds like a great place to live and to raise your kids if you have enough money.
Right.
You definitely need to be one of the big earners with a job that can provide you and your family with enough financial stability. Just like Peter McAllister and his wife Kate. We don't know exactly what Peter and Kate do for a living. Official sources only state that he was a, quote, successful businessman, end quote. Whatever that means, I mean, so was Pablo Escobar, right? And that Kate was a fashion designer, but not for a luxury brand, more for a store chain, like, I don't know, what's the name of the chain? Blau's House, Blau's Barn, Dress Barn, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Dress Barn. Not that there is anything wrong with that, I just want to give you the right idea.
Yeah, she designed things to be bought off the rack. She wasn't, designing couture pajamas or anything, but she made great money doing it.
Yes, and the power couple bought a mansion in aforementioned Winnetka where they raised their 5 children. And the children were Buzz, 16, in 1990. He was their firstborn, who is described as, quote, stocky and muscular, a jock with a 3-inch waxed flat top, end quote. Their second child was Megan, 15, who in some things you see comes across as very aloof and vain, but even though she could be mean to her younger siblings, deep down, I think she really cared for her family. She's just a teenager.
Sure.
Then came Linny, who was 13 at the time, a typical middle child with interest in foreign languages. Next was Jeff. He is often described as aggressive and confident. And their last born, Kevin, who was 8 in 1990, who could be very mischievous, as 8-year-old boys often are. He was a smart kid, very self-sufficient. The problem, like in many families, Kevin was often the victim of bullying by his older siblings, and often he would get chastised by his parents for things that were not entirely his fault. I don't know, we can only imagine what this combination of neglect, bullying, and unfair treatment can do to such a young child's psyche. Kevin McAllister might just be a powder keg waiting to explode.
Yeah, it very well could be. All right. Peter and Kate raised their family in a beautiful 1920s red brick mansion. It was built in a colonial Georgian style. FancyPantsHomes.com, which is my new favorite website, they describe the gorgeous house as follows, quote, the red brick Georgian-style home sits on a half-acre with around 4,200 square feet of living space, boasts 5 bedrooms, including a 4-room master suite, which spans the entire west wing of the home, and 3.5 bathrooms. As one enters the house, a legendary staircase welcomes guests. The iconic suburban Chicago home also has a large kitchen, a detached double garage, and a greenhouse, end quote. It's a nice house. It's beautiful. It's a dream house.
It's very nice, yeah. We're gonna post photos.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It reminds me of a much bigger version of the brick house that I lived in as a kid that we had to sell because of my allergies. Again, Dad, sorry. All right. So it was a couple days before Christmas 1990, and even though the McAllisters live in this huge mansion with plenty of space, the house was now absolutely bursting at all seams. Peter's brother Frank and his family, they were visiting, and when I say the house was bursting, I mean it. So it was Peter and Kate and their 5 kids, and then Frank, his wife Leslie, and their 5 kids, as well as their niece Heather. 15 people in total. Together, the 2 families were preparing for a trip to Paris, France. They were going to visit the 3rd McAllister brother, Rob, who was also very successful. God knows why he was so wealthy, but he was living in Europe with his wife Georgette and 3 of their 4 children. Their oldest, Heather, she was the niece, and she had stayed behind in the United States to attend school. She didn't want to leave her school. And so she was on the trip as well, flying over to see her parents and siblings overseas.
Yeah, the McAllisters seem to be very successful and very fertile people.
Yeah, there's a lot of Irish Catholics in Chicago, I think. Very family-oriented. Yeah, so this year Rob had invited his 2 brothers and their entire families over to Paris so that all of them could spend Christmas together.
That's so nice and so generous, right?
Right? If we make that big podcasting money someday, I'm going to fly my whole family somewhere to be together for Christmas or any holiday or not a holiday. Off-peak, you save more money and you can add that breakfast supplement to the room. Okay. Anyway, the house is full, so really full. Just a ton of people everywhere, which is kind of great in a way, right? But also, so stressful. Everyone's nervous and excited because you know how the office is the last week before a holiday, right? You're just positively bedeviled with meetings, etc. So you're just exhausted. Yeah. And who wouldn't be excited to go to Paris for Christmas? So there's a lot of packing to be done for that, which, as someone who flies overseas a lot during coat and sweater season, it's actually really hard to coordinate when you're packing all of your bulkiest stuff. And then you just wear as many layers as you can on the plane, right?
Definitely.
So anyway, not my vacation. Everybody remember vacations? Anyway, not my vacation, it's theirs. So it's the night before the big trip, and they've ordered pizza because who has time to cook for 15 people the night before a transatlantic flight? And also, you don't want a bunch of groceries stinking up the house while you're away. Yeah, my family, every time, because I live so close to Boston and they're on Cape Cod, they all come here. And every time they would come here, it's usually when they'd visit. And there was a whole thing where for like years, they'd be like, you never have any food in the house. And I was like, maybe if you came another time other than the night before we were going to fly out somewhere. Who has food in their house right before a trip? All right. So you remember before, we told you all about Winnetka, and the article said that there had been some summer burglaries. Well, it was not much different for winter that year as well. I think this is a universal danger in most countries, right? Waves of burglaries during the holiday season. Paul found a fun YouTube video about this that we'll have to remember to share in the episode album.
Yeah, so according to statistics, burglaries occur with an increase of 15 to 20% around the holidays in December, while the peak during summer vacation is still a little bit higher than that. But many burglars do even go after the expensive Christmas gifts, which, I don't know, it's somehow next level meanness.
It really is.
Yeah, even in a very beloved children's story from 1957, they warn about the dangers of Christmas-time burglars.
Are you talking about the Grinch?
I'm talking about the Grinch, yeah.
Dr. Seuss is from Springfield, Mass. That's where my parents grew up and met before kindergarten. His books are great. All right, back to real life and the dangers. So let's look at the problems Winnetka was facing in December of 1990. Because burglars had been stalking the wealthier neighborhoods dressed up as police officers, which is a clever way to do it. They even had the audacity to visit the residents and ask them about their security systems during the holiday season, pretending that they're concerned for their safety as police. And yes, one of those fake police officers even gets the chance to speak to a very frantic Peter McAllister, and the stressed out father, unfortunately, tells the criminal all about the family's planned trip. He didn't know, but yeah. All right. So we have a house full of people. We all know how stressful a situation like that can be. Everyone's munching away on the pizza they'd ordered, and we don't know exactly what happens, if it was an accident or absolutely on purpose. I think it was on purpose, but it seems like a sibling thing. But Buzz eats all of the cheese pizza, which is Kevin's favorite. And you know how kids at this age are, right? About pizza toppings. It's tough about eating anything at that age. And also he's a little bit spoiled and he gets super upset. He refuses to eat anything else. And then he somehow manages to throw milk and he ruins the rest of the pizza. And there's just a lot of fighting ensuing. And so Kevin is punished by Kate. She sends him up to sleep in the attic, which causes Kevin to get even more agitated. And he even tries to place a curse on his family by wishing for his family to disappear forever.
I know kids can say things like this when they are overwhelmed and angry, but Kevin, I don't know. Am I the only one who thinks he's being a brat?
No.
I know his siblings and cousins could be meanest at times, but as far as I read eyewitnesses' reports and watch the available video footage, he comes across as rather narcissistic, like he feels superior to everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of his behavior is reasonable and almost expected for a child that age. Like, if all you'll eat is cheese pizza, which was 1,000% me as a kid, and my sister ate all my food, it wouldn't have been pretty. She was stronger than me, but I had a longer reach.
You know, we often talk about cases where everything that could possibly go wrong indeed does go wrong, and this case isn't any different. So during the night, I think it was the 21st to 22nd of December, a storm hits Winnetka and a tree branch hits the power lines as well as the phone line, which leads to a power failure. And we know in the 90s, everybody had these radio alarm clocks, you know what I mean? The ones that would need to be plugged in and it would wake you with whatever, just was airing on the radio station you chose.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an absolute gamble because you could hit the jackpot and be awoken by, I don't know, Bob Marley's Three Little Birds, which is a great song to wake up to. Or you could have, your whole day spoiled by waking up to the synthesizer fanfares of Final Countdown. Then that abomination would be stuck in your brain for the rest of the day and you would slowly but surely descend into the mouth of madness.
Okay, here's the thing. The Final Countdown is Paul and my song. It's our song.
I know.
It's awful. Sometimes as a couple, you don't get to choose your song. The song chooses you. Even if it's synthesizer madness.
So I hate that song so much. Could you tell? I hate that song. Almost as much as I hate Celebration.
Oh, I also am not a fan of Celebration. It's so overused.
I mean, sorry, if you need a song to tell you to celebrate, there's something really... Maybe you shouldn't celebrate at all. Maybe you should just sit down.
Yeah, just take a seat. Let everyone else celebrate.
Okay, right. So of course the power failure causes the alarm not to go off and the McAllisters are only awoken when their airport transit arrives to pick them up.
It's a literal nightmare. Can I also say it would never happen to me? I don't know if this happens to you, but the night before an early flight, I don't sleep. I swear I wake up every 20 minutes and I look at the alarm clock and I see it's been 20 minutes and then I fall fitfully back to sleep.
I think through my time as a flight attendant, I'm a very relaxed traveler, usually.
That's great. One of us should be, so that bears well for the future.
But the McAllisters, well... They overslept, so we can only imagine how all hell broke loose. It's 15 people who need to get to the airport. Everybody was rushing to get dressed, and they grab their stuff, and they rush into the minivans that are waiting for them. And of course, with so many people, it is absolutely essential to do a head count before they leave. Which they do, which is smart. And off they go. And they really make it to the airport in time and they catch their plane because it's before 9/11 and you had a chance at still catching a plane if you were running late for your flight in those days. And everything worked out and they had a great time in Paris and that's it. And we wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. No, of course not, because what the McAllisters didn't know yet that the head count that was done was off by one. One child was missing. And that was 8-year-old Kevin, who had been sleeping in the attic and had no idea that he was left home alone. Now, I used to work as a flight attendant, not as ground staff, admittedly, so I'm really not entirely sure if this could have happened or if this would have happened. But I think if they all booked the tickets together and one person from this group would not check in, I assume that the ground staff would somehow notice, even if the ticket wasn't there, but they would see it in the booking information. Right.
I'm not sure, unless the brother had purchased all the tickets. I don't know, did it have your age or any information like that back then? Because they might have thought it was just another adult brother that was showing up on his own. I don't know. I don't know if it was a big deal before 9/11. Were you a flight attendant after 2001 or before?
Both. I was actually out being trained for the Boeing 777 to switch from short range to long range when we heard the news about the 2 planes that hit the World Trade Center.
Okay, yeah.
Which was horrible.
Yeah. Either way, they made it. It was a Christmas miracle.
They made it.
They got on the plane.
It was the holidays. This huge group of people comes rushing to the counter and the adults are all flying first class. Yeah. So you also try to be super helpful, I guess. And they are rushed to the gate. And I guess let's assume that's how this could have happened. I'm not going to judge the ground staff here.
No. They're not responsible for making sure you have all your children.
Exactly, they're not responsible.
No.
The grown-ups are. And guess what? It will take a couple of hours until anyone even realizes that one of the children is missing. I read that Kate had this feeling, I think we all know this, what did I forget?
Yes.
Did I lock the door? Did I turn off the stove? Did I unplug the iron? I always have this horrible feeling that I forgot to turn off the stove and that it causes a fire and the dogs are at home and, One hot summer day we decided to go out for lunch. And we were already halfway there and I made Philip turn around and drive back home because I wasn't sure if I had let Jem in or if he was still outside in the garden. So I rushed into the apartment and found him sleeping on the cool bathroom floor. So
Yeah. Yeah, see, that's the benefit to almost never cooking, is I don't worry so much about the oven. I should really probably open it up and just air it out and make sure a possum hasn't taken up residence or something. I don't know. No, I do occasionally reheat leftovers in there. But yeah, I think I always know I'm going to forget something. I also feel like I think I've explained like an anxiety disorder as that feeling, you know, like the feeling you have when you know there's something you're forgetting and it might be a real big problem. You just feel like that all the time. It's not great. But yeah, most of the time it's fine because you can probably get what you need. If you forgot something, they'll have it where you're going. But yeah, I'm going to guess that 15% of all of my waking hours are just spent wondering what I'm forgetting. And that number rises exponentially before vacation. So Kate was probably going through all the things in her mind. The doors are locked. Did they even get all the luggage? Stove, iron, coffee machine. And the thing is, the kids are not with them in first class. They did things right, and the kids are back in coach. So it's not as if she can just take a quick glance around and immediately realize that her youngest isn't on board. And remember, there were multiple minivans getting them there. So yeah. But she very clearly realizes at one point that the thing she forgot to do was to wake up her son. Can you imagine that feeling? I mean, I'm not judging. One really can't imagine the toll having children takes on its mother. But now you're on a plane over the Atlantic and you realize that you've left your 8-year-old home unattended, unsupervised, solo, without any other people. All right, what can you do? She must have been worried sick. Where's Kevin or his bags?
Well, okay, I would immediately inform the flight crew. The pilots would need to contact flight control and they would need to contact authorities so that an officer could be sent over to the house to check immediately.
I mean,
you can do that.
Yeah, sure you can. I think they did try to do that, but I think they just tried to call the neighbors. It's 1990, and an 8-year-old could buy a fifth of whiskey and a carton of cigarettes if they had a note from their parent and enough cash.
True.
You know, yeah. Different time. So the family's like, it'll be fine. They wait until they get to Paris to actually do something about the situation. In the meantime, Kevin wakes up and he finds himself in this huge mansion all alone without his family. And you'd think he would be terrified, but he's actually super excited. I assume he really thought that his witchcraft worked and he had somehow managed to curse his family into disappearing.
You see, and that's exactly why I get a sociopathic vibe. I said kids might say or think that they hate their family and that they wish they were gone. But I think I would have been so upset if even for 1 minute I would have thought that my family was really gone forever. Wouldn't you have been? At age 8?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd have lost my mind thinking that the gremlins got them, probably. Yeah, so Kevin, though, he's not sad or upset at all. He doesn't grieve. He doesn't feel bad. On the contrary, he goes wild. He has ice cream for breakfast. He uses a sleigh indoors. And he watches violent movies. All things that I think we've all agreed you have to wait until you have to pay taxes to do. But then, during the first night alone, he hears people trying to get into the house. It's the 2 burglars who had been staking out the neighborhood. And they surely think that the McAllister home is deserted as well. But what they don't know is that a little boy is all alone down there. Kevin hears the attempted break-in and quickly turns on the lights, which scares the bandits off.
That's some quick thinking.
Yeah, it is very quick thinking. But he has a feeling that they're going to be back. Meanwhile, the plane arrives in Paris, and now they do try to contact local authorities, local meaning the Winnetka, and they also try to get an immediate flight back home. They even offer to book a private plane, but nothing is available.
I mean, who can't just, book a private plane?
Right?
I certainly can.
I mean,
normal.
Do you know how much it costs to do that?
Transatlantic? Way too much. Way too much.
That would be a lot of money. Yeah.
And that's another thing I just don't get, So they can book a private plane. These are all highly successful people. Why don't Peter or Kate call their assistant, just, hey, Michelle, could you mind driving over to the house and check on the boy I forgot there? Problem solved, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they couldn't call the house directly, right? We read that the phone lines hadn't been properly fixed from the storm, but they do have an officer drive out to do a welfare check on Kevin, and the officer knocks on the door, but he doesn't open it.
Yeah, he probably was too scared with the attempted break-in the night before. Maybe he thinks that the burglars are back.
Maybe. And they knock on the door before they rob you, though? What are they, vampires?
Look, I don't say that's what I would be thinking, but we are talking about a third grader.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Let's talk a little bit about the criminals, shall we?
Let's.
All right.
So, the burglars that terrorized Winnetka in winter of 1990 are Harry Lyme and Marv Murchins. They call themselves the Wet Bandits because they do not only break into your house, invade your privacy, rob your valuables, they also clog the drains and turn on the water faucets so that the house will be flooded.
Such a dick move.
So, thanks, on top of the theft and the emotional trauma, they also ruin your house and you will be out of a fortune to get your home back into shape. So, such assholes.
Seriously, such assholes. Like, just take the stuff and go. You don't need to ruin the house.
Exactly.
Ugh. All those original floors.
So Harry Lyme, I suppose his parents were Orson Welles fans. He's a descendant of Italian immigrants. He was a school dropout who didn't even make it to 6th grade. And because he had no education and because he had a face that would make him a perfect character in any gangster movie, Harry turned to petty crime and soon after he partnered up with Marv. Marv Murchins was the one who came up with the name Wet Bandits, and their calling card, The House is Underwater. We know nothing about Marv's life up until December 1990, but you could consider him the quote-unquote muscle of the duo, even though he looks a little bit like Big Bird. And so if Marv is the muscle, that leaves Harry as the brain, which... I mean, they both are not the brightest candle on the Christmas tree, but yeah, Harry could be considered the smarter one there.
Yeah, I mean, Harry is way shorter than Marv as well. So if I had to guess, I'd say that Harry's around my sister's height. He's around like 5'3", or is it 1.63 meters? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Marv, he's like a foot taller. He's around 6'4", so like around 1.93 meters. And when you look at photos of them, they kind of do resemble Pinky and the Brain.
Yeah, or Beaker and Dr. Bunsen. Oh, and I almost forgot, Harry Lyme was apparently also physically abusive towards his sidekick Marv.
Yeah, it's always the same with these sorts of people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, on the first night, the two get scared off by Kevin turning on the light, but they must have been really wondering where they went wrong. They had everything planned out. They knew exactly which houses were supposed to be empty over the holidays, which security systems were in place, when the automatic lights were going to turn on each property every night. So they were super organized. But why was somebody home in the McAllister home? He'd spoken to them. They were supposed to be going away, but maybe they were mistaken and it was just automatic lights that went on. So they returned the next night to try again. But you have to admit one thing. Kevin McAllister was a smart kid. He had anticipated the burglar's return, and so he had set up a kind of like a shadow theater, a party scene consisting of his mother's mannequins that he moved with a self-constructed impossible machine. He had music blasting, and from the outside, it looked as though there was an amazing Christmas party happening inside.
Yeah, that's also a great tip for those of you who feel a bit isolated or lonely at the moment. You know, pop a couple of mannequins on a record player and have yourself a little party.
No, don't do that. That makes me worry about you.
Maybe you're wondering what Kevin's family is planning on doing in the meantime. Well, Peter and the rest of the family head over to Rob's apartment while Kate stays at the airport trying to catch a flight back to the US. Any flight will do. She even tries to bribe people by bragging with her swag, offering her expensive watch and money, which in the end actually gets her to Dallas. And from there she manages to get a flight to Scranton, Pennsylvania, the 6th largest city in Pennsylvania. And Scranton is of course maybe best known as the location of a US branch of the paper company Dunder Mifflin. Some of our listeners may also recall the infamous Scranton Strangler killings.
Oh, so bad.
Scranton lies approximately 720 miles or 1,160 kilometers east of Winnetka, so that would be an 11-hour drive. But of course, Kate McAllister was planning on catching a flight from Scranton to Chicago O'Hare.
Yeah.
You can find several flights daily, and it's usually a 2-hour flight time. And after traveling for mere 60 hours, so exhausting.
I can't even imagine.
I mean, imagine traveling for 60 hours and you arrive in Scranton.
No, I won't, and you can't make me.
So she arrives in Scranton, and guess what? It's absolutely impossible to catch a connecting flight. Rumor has it that even Elvis Presley, who didn't die according to some people, was stranded in Scranton Airport at the same time.
That's amazing.
Kate also can't get a rental car. This woman must have felt so guilty and desperate, but still, she does not try to contact authorities or an assistant or a friend. Do we really think that everybody in their life has gone missing in action over the holidays? I mean, as far as I read, they even have this kind of grumpy old neighbor who never leaves his house. So, I mean, sure, that man was a bit creepy, but I would still try to get in touch with him. But no, she doesn't.
No, I know. I think, well, also remember, it's pre-cell phone, so how many numbers does she know by heart?
That's true.
She would know her assistants, I'm sure. But yeah, I think Peter just was acting with a little bit more common sense at that time. I think she was in, like, frantic mom mode, whereas I think Peter was trying to call neighbors, but they were also all gone for the holidays, and so all he could do is leave messages on their answering machine. We still have an answering machine, but that's old people speak for voicemail, for younger people listening. It doesn't have a tape in it, though. It's digital now. It's fancy.
I still call it Anrufbeantworter, so call answerer, which is the German word for answering machine.
Yeah.
And I also still say Hitparade instead of charts, which is much to the amusement of my former very hip cousin.
I love it.
But enough with aging myself, back to Kate in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So I guess over Christmas people are especially kind-hearted, and her wailing and pleading was overheard by a man named Gus Polinski. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it should, because he was the polka king of the Midwest and the founder of the Kenosha Kickers. Some of the biggest hits immediately come to mind, like Polka Polka Polka, Yamahuzi Polka.
Let's not forget the Polka Twist. That one will have you just rolling an ankle in no time. It's good stuff.
Or the Twin Lake Polka. They are so big in Sheboygan. You might have even seen them perform live at one point, if you are into polka, that is.
Who isn't?
Exactly.
Right?
So these hard-working musicians usually toured the US up to 49 weeks per year.
Ugh,
can you imagine?
That's hard. I'm sure their families were thrilled with them gone all the time.
Fun fact. Most people believe that polka comes from Poland, but it actually originated in Bohemia.
I didn't know that. I love it.
Okay, so Gus Polinski and the Kenosha Kickers manage to get a van, and they offer Kate to hitch a ride with them, which she gladly accepts.
Can you imagine, though? I feel like that's something I'd have done in the 90s. Like, my plane home is canceled, which I often got stuck in Charlotte trying to get back from Massachusetts from Florida. And so my flight lands and I can't get home, and I call my parents from a payphone and be like, just listen, I've only got 25 cents. Don't worry, I'm in a van with a band I just met. I'll see you in 12 hours. Bye.
And it's a polka band. It's a polka band.
But I don't have enough time to tell them that. And they imagine that I'm like, I'm in a van with Motley Crue.
Yeah.
Anyhow, all right. So Peter and the rest of the family, they're in Paris. They're living their best lives, eating unpasteurized cheese and croissants, all with that good butter the whole day. And they're just waiting for a return flight. Kate, meanwhile, is trapped in a van with the polka guys. And what about Kevin and the Wet Bandits? Well, the child managed to get rid of them the 2 previous nights. Once, of course, he startled them away, and the second time he convinced them that there was a party going on with his shadow puppets, but he knows they will be back for a final showdown. It's Christmas Eve, 1990. It's a Monday at 9 p.m., and once more, the Wet Bandits are trying to enter the McAllister home. But Kevin is ready. The 8-year-old had overheard the plans of the 2 criminals to once more try to burglarize his home, so Kevin sets up an elaborate series of booby traps throughout the house. You just have to wonder, did he come up with these things on the spot? Because it's kind of elaborate.
Mm-hmm.
Or had he maybe been fantasizing about torture devices for a while now? Maybe it's one of his things. Maybe he was planning on doing these things to his older siblings.
Yeah.
Well, there's no point in analyzing Kevin's mind. We're not John Douglas. But let's see. We did find a list of all the things that Kevin sets up to welcome the Wet Bandits. So Harry and Marv arrive at the house and they try to get in. And now we're going to read to you all the things that they had to endure, if possible, in chronological order. Get ready. It's not good, and it really does escalate quickly.
Yeah, we had to really write this out, this part, because otherwise we would miss too many things he did to these 2 men.
Yeah, it's a lot. The police reports are tedious. Tedious is the word.
So It's 9 p.m. They arrive and first Harry is shot in the nether regions by a BB gun, followed by a shot on the forehead for Marv. Harry then tries to approach the front door but slips and falls twice on the ice-covered steps. Next, he severely burns his right hand when he touches the searing hot doorknob, which comes from an electric barbecue starter on the other side. This will leave a permanent scar in the shape of an M, which will always remember him of what he has to endure over the next hour or so by the hands of one of the McAllisters. Meanwhile, Marv tries to get in at the back door, where he slips and falls down a set of steps of the ice-covered stairway entrance to the basement. When he finally enters the basement, he is hit in the face by a glowing hot iron that had been placed on the laundry chute on one of the upper floors. So he now has a massive burn on his face. He then tries to walk up the basement stairs, but Kevin covered them in tar, which causes him to lose his shoes and socks. But obviously Kevin's deranged mind has more for him in store, so Marv steps on a nail that was placed with the pointy end up in the tar, and he seriously sank this 3-inch common nail into his foot all the way. Probably went right through, right? He then decides that he won't get up there through the basement, so he leaves the house again, causing him to slip on the icy steps again. Then he enters through a window and steps barefoot on some glass Christmas ornaments.
That is a John McClane situation all over again. Oof.
Yeah.
Ow.
Back to Harry, whose entire upper part of his head is burned by a blowtorch. It even melts his beanie onto his head. And it was the 1990s, so that was probably a really fine wool acrylic mix.
Yeah, no, I think that was straight up acrylic. You know that acrylic that makes your hands dry when you knit with it and it like squeaks if your tension's too tight on the needles? It's what I imagine that hat was. It's not pretty. Harry finally manages to enter the house, only to walk into saran wrap covered with glue, and then he gets blasted with feathers blowing from a fan. I don't know about you guys, but I would call this a modern-day tarring and feathering. Yeah. Harry and Marv finally meet up again, and I assume Marv must have been rather irritated by Harry's chicken look. We can only guess that they must have felt absolutely helpless, completely at the 8-year-old's mercy. I mean, you're aware that they were trying to break in and steal all of the stuff, right? I mean, they could have just left, looking like John McClane and a disgruntled pelican. I mean... Yes, they could have, but Kevin could have simply called the police. But no. He enjoyed what he was doing way too much. He wanted to escalate the whole situation as much as possible. So next, Harry and Marv slip on some matchbox cars, or whatever they're called, you know, the tiny cars. Yeah, matchbox cars. And then they get hit right in the freaking face by a full paint can, which even causes Harry to lose a gold tooth. Yeah, I think he was actually lucky to only lose one tooth, but we'll get more into that later. Yeah. So you see the wild hunt led them through the whole house and out a window over to the children's tree house right in front of Kevin's bedroom. The wet bandits tried to climb over there on a rope. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. Yeah. Exactly. Of course, they swing right into a wall after the devil's child cuts the rope on one side. They even chase Kevin over into a neighbor's house, so that's the house that has been burglarized the night before. And actually, they almost catch the boy. But the grumpy old neighbor, who has nothing better to do than to serve as a deus ex machina, he saves him last minute by bashing their heads with a shovel. Finally, it's over. Kevin can no longer harm the two grown-ups, and finally the authorities are contacted, which leads to the criminals being arrested. Okay, what are we thinking about this violence galore? It's a lot. I think we both agree, that Harry and Marv are lucky to be alive, right? And while researching this case, we came upon a Thrillist.com article by Will Fulton and the New York City internist Dr. Diego Ponyman. He is interviewed. He works at Mount Sinai Hospital, and let's see what he has to say about the wet bandits. So, quote, BB gun, 5 or more potential injuries, diagnosis, quote, laceration on the forehead, almost definitely. Close range probably wouldn't be enough to fracture the skull, but it would break the skin or even get lodged in deeper tissue. The BB probably wouldn't break through pants, depending on the fabric, but there could be serious lasting damage to the testicle if it was in fact a direct hit, especially at that range, end quote. Next, we've got stair falls, 15 or more potential injuries at least. Diagnosis, quote, neither one would be able to get up after these falls, especially at their age. Any of these tumbles would definitely be enough to send them to the ER immediately. Herniated discs, bruised or fractured tailbones, multiple spinal fractures, broken limbs and ribs, serious deep tissue bruising, internal bleeding, and that's just a start. Damage to the coccyx or tailbone would make it extremely painful and even difficult to stay seated, let alone walk or run. They are old enough to have underlying health problems for the rest of their lives just based on these falls alone. End quote.
Savage.
Yeah. Iron to the face, 6 or more possible injuries. The diagnosis from the doctor is, quote, probable concussion, potentially an orbital fracture. Eye muscles can get caught in the fracture, and that's a very serious emergency. Yeah, it sounds like it. Jesus. Loss of vision is possible, could develop, quote, raccoon eyes, which is bruising of the tissues around the eyes, and you could definitely get a skull fracture. Next we have nail in foot. 7 or more potential injuries. Diagnosis, quote, this one looks painful. Perforated fascia, maybe. Could definitely injure some tendons in the foot. The lingering effects of this injury could get intense if not properly treated. Deeper tissue infection or cellulitis. He should hope the nail is not rusty. Rusty nails do cause tetanus if no treatment is given. It would be extremely hard to put weight on this foot afterwards. Yeah. Hand branding. Oof. 5 or more potential injuries. Diagnosis, quote, second-degree burns would be caused, blistering of the tissue, deep blistering, decreased mobility of the hand with serious sensitivity, possibly long-term. In this case, I don't think the actual scar would remain forever as opposed to a third-degree burn, but some permanent color changes and immobility are a distinct possibility. Bulbs and ornaments in the foot, 4 or more injuries. Diagnosis, quote, glass would become embedded in the foot and would need to be removed piece by piece, which would prove very difficult. It is. I've done it. He would not be able to walk after this point. The embedded pieces would just go deeper and deeper, cutting his foot with each step. Would not be as deep as the nail, though. Probably would have put his shoes back on, though, right?
Why he didn't take his shoes?
Yeah. Flamethrower on the head. 7 or more potential injuries. Diagnosis. This is a very serious and potentially critical injury. His skull could melt off the top of his head. Jesus Christ.
That sounds very critical.
Listen, I'm not gonna lie, but skull melting off the top of your head would, we're sure this guy's a doctor at Mount Sinai.
That's very Indiana Jones.
Is he a Nazi? Did he just find the Ark of the Covenant? All right. So the doctor continues. Open dehydration and infection, almost certainly. He stayed in there for so long, for some reason, that the fire would have spread and more than just the top of his skull would have been affected. Even the heat coming from the flame would have impacted the surrounding skin of his ears, his eyes, and other facial features. If he could have possibly survived this, he would have horrible scarring. All right. The tar and feathering. Probably no serious injuries, emotional scarring, if anything. I'm glad someone's thinking about their emotional well-being. All right. Micro machines fall. Oh, that's what they were called. They were Matchbox cars when we were kids. They were micro machines in the 90s. Mm-hmm. Yes. So 5 or more potential injuries. Diagnosis, quote, this was an intense fall. Marv is still shoeless for some reason, so he would have potentially hurt his foot even further. They are clearly on the verge of paralysis at this point. Paint bucket to the face, 8+ injuries. Every time we have this list, obviously, because this is a quote from this doctor in this article, but every time I look at the list, because it's like 8+. Diagnosis, quote, another concussion is definitely, probably causing serious... Definitely, probably.
You think?
I love it when my doctors use the words definitely and probably right after each other in a sentence. So, yeah, another concussion is definitely probably causing serious long-term neurological damage at this point. Blunt force trauma to the head, broken nose, fractured skull, all possible. Epidural hematoma is a distinct concern at this point. This would knock out more than one tooth. Major dental work would be needed. Would need a few visits to oral maxillofacial surgeon. Hope they have good insurance with good coverage and low deductibles. Yeah. But being professional criminals, they probably do not. I could only assume this blow would knock them out cold, especially after all the other major brain damage throughout the night. End quote. Yeah, these guys don't have insurance. And even I have really good insurance, and I've needed another root canal I put it off at the beginning of COVID thinking that COVID would be over real soon. Long story short, I still need a root canal. My point was that I have really good insurance and it doesn't cover anything. So these guys, they're not getting any implants.
They're fucked. Yeah. Everything's fucked for them.
Everything is fucked for them today. And they brought it on themselves. So, in a way. Fall from the treehouse rope. 10 or more potential injuries. Diagnosis. Quote, more of the same. Everything mentioned on the previous falls. They would not get up from this one. Except heavy injuries, possibly critical, especially with everything else they've been through. Strain of cervical, paraspinal muscles, possible. Would need a cervical collar for a while. Shovel to the skull. 6 or more potential injuries. Diagnosis. Quote, temporary blackout, another concussion is almost assured. Definitely now at risk for epidermal hematoma. If their night wasn't over before, it would definitely end right here.
And it did.
They would not be able to walk into a cop car of their own volition. No way. They'd be incredibly lucky to be alive. Overall, our assessment comes to a whopping 85 distinct injuries over the course of the night for the wet bandits. End quote. That's a lot. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
I mean, it's not as bad as my medical history, but it's a lot. It's a lot.
In one night. It's a lot for one night. It's unnecessarily violent.
Yeah.
This kid was so violent. And this 8-year-old not only was so violent against grown-ups, almost killing them, he also managed to not kill himself in those few days that he was left behind by his entire family. And guess what? The next morning, so on Christmas Day, the Kenosha Kickers van stops in front of the McAllister home and Kevin is reunited with his mother. And the real kicker, only a few minutes later the rest of the family arrives as well because they had waited for the next available flight to Chicago O'Hare.
Which was smart, but, hindsight is 20/20 and I understand a panicking mother who just wants to get home to her kid. No, I can't. I can't actually understand that, but I can understand wanting to get home.
I think it comes to no one's surprise that super rich Peter and Kate McAllister are not charged with child endangerment and or child neglect and actually arguably also child abandonment. We can argue that Kate didn't know that Kevin was left behind, but I'd say that she already knew before they landed in Paris and that there would have been so many more things they could have done to make sure Kevin is safe.
I mean, he was fine. I'd hire him to house sit. And back in 1990, I probably could have.
Happy holidays!
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. This, of course, was the plot of Home Alone, which was written by John Hughes and directed by Chris Columbus.